Well, I'm glad you're here. 2 weeks ago, we started a series that I'm calling Everyday Disciple. And do you remember, again, I know it's been 2 weeks. You've slept a few times since then. You might have even been sleeping that day. But do you remember the passage that we were looking at? I smell smoke. Now, we were looking at the Great Commission, right? And you remember in that, and we call that the Great Commission, which says it's a big deal, it's really consequential, and so as part of that, Jesus says to do what? He says to go and make disciples. And so if we call this the Great Commission, that suggests that it's important, that it's big, it's of real consequence, and so if we're supposed to be doing something that's really important, that's what we spent time last week, or 2 weeks ago, thinking about, is, well, what exactly is that? And this whole experience or the reality of being a disciple, what's involved in that? And so just so that we're kind of on the same page and we got our minds thinking back in the same vein, one of the things that we talked about was that it's easy for us to hear the word disciple or discipleship and think that that exists only within Christian circles. But one of the things that we had noted is that there's disciples in every aspect of life, and that you as a person are a disciple of a whole lot of things or a whole lot of people. And so people that have no relationship with Jesus, that couldn't care less about God or the Bible or anything, they too are disciples, because discipleship is experienced in virtually every facet of life. And so what we started with was thinking about some of the non-spiritual aspects of discipleship. And so what I had asked you was, what are some components of being a disciple from a non-spiritual perspective? Do you remember some of the stuff that we talked about? So if you write it down, then you're really good.
Yeah. They have teachers, leaders, parents.
All right, so those are some examples of it, but what are some of the components that make someone a disciple in some of those areas? So we talked about, all right, so exposure was one of them. So it's tough to be a disciple of someone or something if there's no exposure. And I think what I had said was, I've heard my kids, or I'll hear a celebrity's name and I'm like, who's that? And so I don't even know who they are, because I have no exposure. What else? You remember them? It's a very basic thing. Remember it starts with an I? The bank isn't paying much of it right now. There you go. Isn't it tough to be a disciple of someone if you have no interest in them? Like if you don't like them at all, if you don't care about them at all, every time they show up on TV, you change the channel. Like a friend of mine, his dad, there was a sportscaster on the ABC affiliate in Charlotte, and every time, his name was Harold Johnson, every time Harold Johnson would give the sportscast, his dad would mute it and give it the middle finger. And so, because he didn't like Harold Johnson. And so, I didn't write that, that just came to me. Anyway, but he had no interest. He was not a disciple of Harold Johnson, right? No interest. All right, so if you're going to be a disciple of someone, there's going to be some interest, there's going to be some exposure. What else are you going to do?
Emulate.
You're going to try to emulate them. And so if you're emulating, what are you trying to do?
Copy.
All right, so you're going to copy or pattern something about how you operate or how you think, how you process, how you respond. You want to try to do stuff like they do it. What else? So when we talked about discovery, we're talking about that you're doing what from them?
Learning.
That you're learning. A-L-E-A-R-N-I-G. So if you're learning from, and that can happen in formal settings. This is a more formal setting, even though we just talked about Harold Johnson. But this is a more formal setting, but there's a lot of discipleship that occurs where you're learning from someone in a very informal setting. Even basic stuff, like if someone is showing you, I don't know, when you were a kid, if your grandfather showed you how to build a birdhouse, right? I mean, so that's very informal, but you were learning, you were discovering how to do something. So there's discipleship that happens with that. And so the last thing that we talked about, though, too, with respect to it, is that there's a goal. And what's the goal of discipleship?
To learn, accomplish, replicate.
Yeah. It's kind of, the goal in the scheme of things is kind of emulation, that at least in some aspect of this, I want to pattern myself, I want to be doing this like that person. All right, so this type of discipleship is experienced in virtually every facet of life. Emma, you're big on quilting, and so I could become your disciple of quilting. You could, if I were interested in quilting, which clearly I am, and so but I'd have to spend some time with you, and you'd have to show me some stuff. And my goal would be, I want to do this kind of how like Emma does this. And so I'm going to spend some time with you, and you're going to be teaching me, and I'm going to be learning. And the goal is I want to be able to do this on my own. All right? So that type of thing, we talked about it, we just reviewed in our minds. That type of experience of discipleship happens in secular life. But what is of concern to us is that we have not simply this commission, but this great commission, which says, again, it's really important. And Jesus says that spiritually we are to be making disciples. And so what we talked about as we landed the plane in looking at that passage was, what are some of the essential components of Christian discipleship? All right, so all of these things are true of Christian discipleship, but there's some very specific things related to Christian discipleship. And do you remember a couple of them out of the gate?
Bible study.
Oh, yeah, so they're going to be,
Interest.
yeah, so relative to these things. And so there's going to be Bible study.
Being with other believers.
Let's call it fellowship. And I'll put worship in there too, because we should hopefully do that together. Prayer. All right, so all this is kind of part of that category. But if I'm a disciple of Jesus, at the very basic level, what's something I want to make sure, what are some essential components of being a disciple of Jesus?
Obedience.
Yeah, that I'm going to, because a disciple is someone who follows this is how I said it. They follow the direction and they follow the directive. And both of those have to do, in part, with obedience. But think about it. So if at the end of the day, if I'm a disciple of someone, in a very general sense, you can say, well, I'm trying to follow them. I'm trying to follow their lead. And so the direction that they're heading, I want to follow that direction. If I'm a disciple of Jesus, the direction that He is seeking to lead me and guide me in life, I want to follow that. But it's not simply that He's guiding down a path that I'm supposed to follow, but there's other things that the Lord has done, and that He's given me a whole lot of boundaries that He wants me to operate within. And so He's given me directives, He's given me commands that He wants me to follow, and we just call that obedience. All right? So it took us an hour to say that last time. All right? There you go. Look with me today in Colossians 3. All right, we'll get there in just a second. Let me ask you this. I looked this up on Google, and obviously these are just averages because there are people who live longer and those who have shorter lifespans. But on average, the average lifespan, how much do you think the average person, how many years of their life do you think they spend sleeping? Give me a number.
40 years.
Do what?
40 years.
Holy cow. Do you need a nap, Jim?
25.
You're really close. The average person spends 26 years sleeping. So that's 9,490 days. It's 227,760 hours. It's a lot of hours, isn't it? But let me ask you this. When you lay down, do you immediately go to sleep? No. How long do you think the average person spends in their life trying to go to sleep?
A lot.
7 years. Trying to get to sleep. So, sleeping, we spend 33 years. I mean, just in the bed. Trying to get to sleep and actually sleeping. We spend 33 years or 12,045 days. That's a lot of days, isn't it? All right. So that's sleeping. How about just socializing? Like talking to people, spending time with people. How much do you think we spend socializing? Any guesses on that?
That'll vary a lot of people.
Yeah, but it's going to average though. The average spent socializing is 7,872 hours, or 328 days. So the average person's life, if you could stay awake for 300, and clearly you can't because you're sleeping for 33 years, but if you could stay awake for 328 days straight, 24 hours, socializing, that's the average amount of time a person spends socializing, talking with, just engaging with people. All right, now here is something you enjoy more. All right, eating, drinking. Eating. All right, so how much do you think we spend eating? How many hours?
328.
Three?
In our lifetime.
Well, this one is 32,000 hours. Or three. You spend 3.5 years of your life eating.
Is that all?
Well, you don't have, there's not a whole lot of time left because, but once you get out of the bed, you're hungry. All right. So we eat, sleep, we talk to people. What else do we do that we spend a lot of time doing? There we go. That's our biggest chunk. Next. All right. So if we spend 227,000 hours sleeping, and we do that from the time that we come into the world. All right. So this is the average working lifespan. So you don't start until later in life, and you don't do that. When you retire, you don't typically work 7 days a week. So obviously, it's going to be less than this. You want to take a stab on how many hours working? We'll start with hours. 115,340. That's 4,806 days, or 13.2 years. So if you could stay awake, like if you were to, hey Evelyn, morning ladies, come on in. If you could, after sleeping for your 33 years, and hopefully at that point you're pretty well rested, the next 13.2 years you would be working nonstop. So think about that out of your life. Well, just think about if you had a prison sentence of 13 years and 2 months, if the entire time was spent working, that's the average amount of time that a person spends working.
Does that count housework?
I don't know.
Housewife works more.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to ask Google. All I said was, what's the average? Yeah, I don't know. But still, you think about it though, 13.2 years of your life, and I think most people in here are retired though, but you, on average, the average American, that's how much time they have spent working. That's a lot. I mean, keep in mind, we've been asleep for 33 years. We've been in the bed. Do what? Oh no, but between sleeping this long and then laying there trying to go to sleep, so we've been in the bed. We've been in the bed for 33 years. So that's the time that we've got awake, and we've been goofing off socializing for another year over here, and we've been eating. So a big chunk of our waking time in the average person's life has been spent working. Now, what we've been calling, and I'm calling this series, is Everyday Discipleship. Now, that just even the word or the title itself suggests something that many times is different from our perspective with respect to following Jesus. Because a lot of times what we think about in terms of following Jesus is that we do what? We give Him, there's some set blocks of time, there's some compartments that we'll give to Him. All right, so what are our set blocks of time that we give to Jesus? We'll give Him Sundays, and if you're really spiritual, then you give Him Wednesday mornings. Or if you're carnal, you come in late, and then you go. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power. No, I'm just messing with you. Anyway, so I've been gone for a week. I got to get it out. Get it out. I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, we tend to compartmentalize, and we don't intend to do this, but regularly. And if you think about it, we have all done this, where we think, and it becomes on the conscious level, but it happens subconsciously, where we kind of get to the point where we think, okay, there's my spiritual life, and that's this sliver of time on Sundays or on Wednesdays, or there's the occasional other service, there's this meeting, there's a special service, there's something that's going on, and so that's the Jesus time. But we go back to this Great Commission, and Jesus is talking about us as His followers being disciples and helping to make disciples. Well, again, we're sleeping for 33, we're in the bed for 33 years. We've got 13.2 years of our life. That suggests that somehow, some way, I need to make sure that I get this whole process of following Jesus into that chunk of time. And I should have looked up. In fact, for tonight, I will look up how much time I don't know what the average person spends in church, but what we want to think about today is, and I realize, and you may say, well, the ship's already sailed for me because I have finished my working career, I am retired, but there's going to be some principles that are still going to absolutely apply to you, but beyond that, they can be ways in which that you can pass on some truths to maybe to affect your children or your grandchildren, because this is a chunk of time that we need to make sure that Jesus gets into, because we've got this great responsibility not only to make disciples, but to be a disciple of Jesus that's doing all of this. And so if I'm doing all this, I better make sure that I get him into that time. Look with me, Colossians chapter 3. All right, so he says in verse 23, whatever you do, do it from the heart as something done for the Lord and not for people, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance for the Lord. You serve the Lord Christ. The wrongdoer will be paid back for whatever wrong he has done. There is no favoritism. All right, so we spend a lot of our waking time working, and so I want you to think with me today about this whole experience of being an everyday disciple of Jesus, how as a worker, I can make that even spiritual time as well. All right, so he says, whatever you do, what all is included in the whole whatever you do?
Everything.
That's a pretty, whatever. Where do you want to go to eat tonight? Well, wherever. What do you want to do today? Whatever. I mean, I'd be fine doing anything. So that's a catch-all term. So whatever you do, and so the whatever would also include work, doesn't it? So even if you're working, you do it from the heart as something done for the Lord and not for people. Now, I realize at the end of the day, there are, and keep in mind that work is something that God gave us the whole pattern of work, didn't He? And is work a good thing or a bad thing from God's perspective?
It's good.
It's a good thing. And what's the best example that we know that it's good?
We can pay our bills.
Oh, yeah. We like not living in a van down by the river, eating government cheese. But when did work start?
Adam and Eve, they were charged with taking care of the Garden of Eden.
And when were they doing that?
When they was in the Garden of Eden, and when they got cast out, they really had to work.
Yeah, and how long were they in the garden? They were in there until what?
Just they
Until
ate the apple.
and that we call that
Sin.
until sin. So that's important because it tells us that work existed before sin came into the world. So that tells us in paradise, when life was being experienced as it should be experienced, as God wants us to experience it, work was part of the equation. That tells us that God believes and has instituted this as a good thing. But there's another way that we know that work is a good thing. You see it in Genesis 1. Well, so it is in the beginning. And so what did He do? What did He do in the beginning?
God created.
And how did He do it?
The heavens and the earth.
Well, it was a little bit of Lawrence Well, a little bit of a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6 and then a...
7 days.
All right, so God rested on the seventh day, but what did He do on the 6 days?
He worked.
He worked. And so the opposite of work is rest, which clearly y'all are very good at. I mean, you're just... It's a wonder you got out of the bed this morning. Work existed before sin came into the world. That tells us that it's good. And the fact that the Bible describes that God did it. And that for 6 days during this week of creation, He worked. And then He rested on the Sabbath to give us a pattern that He wants us to follow. The fact that God is working suggests that it's also a good thing. And if I'm His follower, I'm His disciple, what's one of the things I want to do?
Rest.
Well, I know she said she wanted to rest. Kay, you just got out of the bed. Yes, I want to rest, but I want to work as well, because that's how God operates. And when Jesus walked among us, Jesus busied Himself as well. And so, going back to this passage in Colossians, whatever you do, and that includes work, which God instituted as a positive thing, as part of operating like He works, that He says that we ought to do it from the heart. And the word that's used there, that's translated as heart, literally means do it from the soul. To me, and you might have heard me say this before, but I remember the first time that I felt like I had a concept or a handle on this whole experience or the reality of a person having a soul. And I don't know why, and it's kind of a simple thought, but I was at Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, and there was a church member we had whose name was Cliff that had wound up, it was terrible. He had cancer had gone to his liver. He was as jaundiced as I've ever seen anybody. I mean, he looked so terrible. But he'd been in that hospice unit for a few days, and they had called me when it was getting close to the time of death. And so I'm there with his wife, I'm there with his son, and we're there as Cliff takes his last breath. And I remember thinking, it's really strange, because all the parts are still here. The heart, the lungs, the brain, fingernails, eyelashes, everything's still there, but Cliff's not here. And so the part of him that made him, the part of him that was loved by his wife and his son, by me and by others, that part is gone. Now, the hand that I shook is still there. The eyes that I had looked into, those are still there. But the part of him that was known, the part that made him, that's gone. And so it was like the lights went off in my mind that when the Bible talks about our soul at that point being with the Lord, it kind of clicked on it. The part of him that made him is with the Lord. And so if you take that back into this passage, he says, whatever you do, do it from the heart, or literally from the soul. So from the part of you that makes you, from the core of your being, he says that's how you ought to do it. That's how you ought to, among other things, that you ought to be working. Can you think of some examples you've seen lately where you would say, I don't think they were doing it like that, from the heart? Any of you gone to get a driver's license lately? You've been to Bojangles lately. Oh, and it's crazy though too, because you've seen. You've seen some of these news stories. So, like McDonald's is like their starting pay $15 an hour, $500 signing bonuses. There was an Arby's down at the beach that had a $750 signing bonus just trying to get people to work. A friend of mine owns a landscape business. Starting pay with insurance, $20 an hour. That ad's been running for months in the Charlotte Observer. And how many applicants do you think he's had? Zero. $20 an hour with benefits. Once y'all get out of the bed, if you want to go work a trimmer, I'll give you his name. But he said, people, they're just not wanting to work. And there's a whole lot of things that factor into that. But regularly, you and I encounter and we deal with people in the whole customer service and stuff that they're just, nobody's in a hurry and just, if it gets done or it doesn't get done. You regularly see this type of behavior. And it's the opposite of doing this from the heart, doing this from the core of your being. And so he's saying, and keep in mind, this is not something that is directed to just everybody. This is something that specifically, and it comes to us as a letter written to people that are followers of Jesus, to folks that are supposed to be disciples who are following the direction and following the directives of God, that this is how we ought to operate, and we ought to be doing this from the core of our being. Now, if we're doing this, if we're operating from the core of our being, if we're working from the heart, what does that suggest in terms of how we operate? What does that suggest about the man? How does...
We're going to do it with a happy face and to the best of our ability.
For one thing, you'll do it to the best of your ability. But Linda said also that we'll be doing it with a happy face. If you're doing it with your heart, it does affect your attitude, doesn't it? Because, I don't know, especially we regularly see this with the children. We'll give them a task to do, and I would say regularly it's not done from the heart. Right? And so for one thing, they will. It can be just a sloppy, haphazard job of it, or it's done with complaining and grumbling. Well, that's not my job, and blah, 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 blah. You know, this complaining and groaning. And so, in fact, some of your Bibles, or the translation says, do it heartily as unto the Lord. And so, in terms of application and principle, this whole experience of being a disciple of Jesus in this big chunk of my waking hours, this is my encouragement for you. Keep the chain of command in view. And I say that because he says, do this from the heart as something done who? For the Lord and not for man. Now I realize in every job, even if you love your job, and I sincerely, and I hope it comes across, I really do love what I do. And I don't do it because I love it. I do it because I think God called me to. I'm just fortunate that I also love, and I hope, again, it comes across that I enjoy what I'm doing. Nevertheless, there are some things that I wind up doing because it's part of my job, right? And there's some things, and in every job, even the ones that you love most, there's some stuff that you just have to do. Some conversations you may have to have, or some things, some tasks that you have, there's no enjoyment from it. But Paul's encouragement is that whatever you're doing, that even if there's not enjoyment in it, operate as though you're not answering to Tommy, but that you're answering to the Lord. That I'm not answering to Gene, I'm answering to the Lord. And so if I keep in mind that I'm operating and working for Him, that should matter more. I remember when I was in school, and like before college and stuff, teachers would, not regularly, but periodically, they would have to be observed. And so a lot of times it was a principal or an assistant principal that would come in. And I remember when those would happen, sometimes the teacher would know, and they may say, hey, listen, tomorrow during fourth period, I'm going to be observed. And so what do you think the teacher then said? You had better be good. The other thing that I found was interesting, though, is that when that happened, I found teachers on those days almost sometimes unrecognizable. Who is that? And I remember, now they've got all kinds of smart technology, but like the smartest thing that we had was an overhead projector. And so they put on, all right, class, these are today's objectives. I thought, what are you talking about? Like today's goal? Not one day have we heard anything like this. And none of the kids are saying anything, but we're sitting there, and I know at least I was thinking what? What was I thinking? She's doing this because the assistant principal is sitting right there and taking notes. And so she wasn't teaching for us. She was teaching for that administrator. And realizing who your ultimate audience is, doesn't that tend to affect how you operate? When Paul says to keep in mind, not to keep in mind, but whatever you do, including this big chunk of our waking time, do it as unto the Lord. I realize there's going to be stuff in your life and other people's life. There's no pleasure in it. It may not be fun, but I need to tell myself at the end of the day, I'm not working for an individual, that my life, my service is for the Lord Himself. And that matters because of something else that he says. He says, knowing in verse 24 that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. Why? Because he says in verse 24, you serve the Lord Christ. In what aspect of your life? Well, all of it. I mean, all of it. And so when he says that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord, what is that an encouragement to remember? When he says that you're going to receive an inheritance from the Lord, receive the reward of an inheritance.
Always do your best.
Well, I think it cuts two ways, though. He says, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance. For people that follow and have a personal relationship with Christ, eternity is going to look pretty good for us, right? It is, because we get to experience heaven, we get to experience the Lord's presence, we get to experience freedom from mortality and the limitations of aging bodies and diminishing eyesight and diminished hearing. But make sure you come next Wednesday and you can get some help with that this side of heaven. But at some point in the future, we're going to be in the Lord's presence, and there is this wonderful inheritance that awaits us. That's really good. And if somebody has done something really good for you, what do you tend to want to do?
Gratitude.
You want to, and what's one of the ways that we demonstrate gratitude?
Saying thank you.
Well, we do say thank you, but
Well, do things that please that person.
yeah. I mean, if
You try harder.
yeah, I remember. Well, in fact, Caroline had taken Elizabeth home last night and was going to take Peter to the store. He had done something. There was some little toy that I can't remember. He was supposed to be getting that, and she's going to try to find him a pair of shorts. And so I won't bore you with all the details of everything that went on, but at some point in that whole experience in the store, Peter got mad and started to show his rear end. And she's like, we're going home and you're going straight to bed because I'm trying to do something for you. I'm trying to give you something. The least that you can do is to keep it together. And so there's part of that here where he says, knowing that you're going to receive an inheritance from the Lord, he's done. And there's this great blessing that's in store for me. And so I ought to operate mindful of the fact that he has done and he's prepared great things for me. But the other thing where he says, knowing that you'll receive the reward of the inheritance. And then he says in verse 25, talking about the wrongdoer will be paid back for whatever he has done. There's a word that you can use to describe that.
Karma.
Do what?
Karma.
Well, karma's a little...
It says favoritism.
Well, when he's saying that with respect to God and how he deals with people, there's no favoritism. But it suggests this. That God operates with accountability. And so, in terms of application, here's a simple principle. Remember that the one that you're following practices accountability. Saying that God practices accountability means what? What does that mean to us?
You'll be held responsible for what you've done or not done.
So that how I'm operating is not indifferent. That at some point I'm going to stand before Him, and of course the root of that is account. I'm going to give an accounting for what I did or what I failed to do with the time that He gave me. All right, so with the time that He gave me, I'm going to spend 33 years of it in the bed. And I'm going to eat for 3.5 years. I'm going to talk for the better part of a year. But I'm going to be working for over 13 years. This is a big chunk of my waking hours. And I'm going to be held to account for how I operated even then. All right, so that's going to lead us to a very practical question I want you to think about with me for a second as we land the plane. All right, how do I work like I'm working for the Lord? We touched on this just a little bit, but how would you answer that question?
Do you have joy?
All right, so I'm going to make that a little more broad for a second. She said, do you have joy? How's my attitude? All right.
I love what I'm doing. You're going to do the best you can.
All right. Am I working well, or am I I'm doing the bare minimum? I mean, I'm doing just enough to keep from getting fired. You ever worked with people like that?
Yeah.
Were you ever that person?
And some people work for the Lord just to check off the checklist. I know people that do that.
Yeah, in fact, when you say that, that reminds me when the offering envelopes, in fact, it used to be those that you'd get from the Baptist bookstore and then Lifeway, you'd have name, all that stuff on there. But you remember it had all those check boxes on the bottom of it, like read Bible daily, witnessed, what else? Attendance time.
On time.
Giving.
Did it said on time?
Yeah. Ours did.
You were very spiritual.
Attended Sunday school, attended worship.
Yeah, I can't remember what, but I think in part that inspired this thought. Am I just checking off a box? I think that affects attitude. So joy, or whether it's perfunctory or not. I think integrity matters, doesn't it? So am I working with integrity? And what are some ways in which integrity in my work matters? What are some ways that I demonstrate integrity in my work?
Doing your job.
Actually doing your job as opposed to...
Just living off.
Yeah, or maybe the 328 days of socializing, you make that about 4.5 years that... just not getting anything done. That it's internet surfing and phone calls and just hanging out in the break room, whatever it is. What are some other ways that you can demonstrate integrity?
You don't waste time or steal time from your employer.
Well, I think stealing in general, and so we can't. And so, with respect to what Lois said, though, too, because at the end of the day, that's being honest with the time. Because ultimately, what is going on when you're working, you are selling your employer time, aren't you? Mm-hmm. All right. So they're going to pay you for 40 hours worth of time, and so yeah, you're working during that, but if you're not actually working, they're paying you for time that you're actually holding on to. So you're stealing from them in that sense. But even more basically, you see, unfortunately sometimes at a more basic level, if you have individuals that are responsible for some of the numbers or some of the accounting for an organization or a company, they could actually be stealing. Or even just stuff around, I'm not saying if there's a Post-it note that somehow winds its way into your pocket that you need to place yourself under citizen's arrest. But you need to be honest with the stuff that belongs to the organization, that belongs to the company, that belongs to wherever it is that you're working. That's their stuff, and so you don't take it. Am I working with integrity?
Your reputation and your character.
Yes, and so that
Your reputation is what others see, and your character is what's inside.
And to Donna's point, they were talking about character. Am I working as reflection? So as a follower of Jesus, I need to, if I'm working, I need to be working like I'm doing what? Like I'm reflecting this whole experience of following Jesus as somebody that has a relationship with Him. You have probably seen this before or heard this before, because I remember as a kid, early on, I came to discover that if somebody, or you saw that fish decal, that meant what?
You're Christian.
It meant Christian. But I've also heard this, like if you were looking through the yellow pages and you needed a plumber, did you look for the Christian thing? I always heard, watch out, they're the worst ones. Didn't you? Because and I don't know if some of you maybe even had experiences with people that, man, they really advertised, oh, we're a Christian organization, and then, or this is a Christian company, then you want to, it's like they're hoodooing you. And so if I'm going to be working as if I'm working for the Lord, I need to work like I'm reflecting Him. This is the last thing, and this is a pretty big one though. Do I view my work as a spiritual opportunity? At the outset, I talked about this whole experience of compartmentalizing. And it tends to be what we regularly do is that we say, all right, there, man, I think Lois is,
The phone call from a
Do what?
telephone company, but this is not it.
I think your phone's on fire.
Or do we need to run?
Please evacuate the building. Is that the normal ring?
Just for people that I don't know.
Holy cow. Does it scare you?
Yes,
I think I would change it to like the ice cream truck or something. That's man.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's
I'm
fine.
waiting for a call from the telephone company.
Man.
Emergency announcement.
Yeah, person missing. Anyway, but what I was saying is that we tend to compartmentalize, and we say there is the spiritual aspect of my life, which that equates to time on Sundays. It accounts to some time maybe on Wednesdays or some other time where it's connected to activity at church. All right. But comparatively, in the span of not just a year, but in the span of our lifetime, that compared to all the other time chunks that we talked about, that doesn't equate to a big chunk of time. But my work time does. And very easily what we can do is to say, well, my job isn't spiritual. I'm not on staff at a church, or I'm not a missionary. I'm not somebody that's in vocational ministry. I fill vending machines, or I am stocking shelves, or I am doing whatever it is that my job is. I'm an accountant. I'm whatever that task is. And to say, well, that's not spiritual. But here's the question: can God use non-spiritual acts for great spiritual effect? Yes. Let me give you the best example in my mind of that. Do you remember the little book of Nehemiah? Do you remember what was going on in the book of Nehemiah?
Building the wall.
They're rebuilding the wall. Now, is building a wall, would you call that a spiritual exercise? It doesn't sound very spiritual, does it? Sounds like a whole lot of work. You remember how all those gates, even the dung gate that they got to rebuild? That didn't sound very spiritual. I mean, if you're working on the dung gate, does that feel like it's a very spiritual enterprise? No, it doesn't. But do you remember what happened as the wall gets rebuilt? Do you remember how the story kind of ends? That there was this effectively massive revival that occurs. Why? Because of a construction project. Because they were doing what God said to do, and in their work, they were working as unto the Lord. And God used that for tremendous spiritual effect in ways that mattered both for time and for eternity. And more than 13 years of the average person's life is going to be spent working. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, they're going to be spending a lot of their time working. And even if you are now retired, you need to realize that whether you're working at home, or you are working in the neighborhood, or you're working wherever it is, make sure that God is an active part of, and that He's incorporated and not compartmentalized, where you say, well, He gets that sliver of time on Sunday or Wednesday, but He wants to be involved in my Mondays. Not just my Sundays, but my Tuesday afternoons and my Friday mornings, and all of this time. And especially the time that I have at work, because most people tend to, I realize some people tend to work by themselves, but even if you're working by yourselves, you still interact with people. And you're still operating in ways where you are a reflection, where you can demonstrate integrity, where you can have conversations where you're able to point people to the one that you follow. Because if you're following Him, you are one of His disciples. And as His disciples, He's called me, He's called you to make disciples. And that includes even in the areas where I work. There you go. How about them apples? Thank you for being here. Any brilliant comments, questions? All right, well, let's pray then. Lord, thank you for letting us spend some time thinking about these ideas this morning that I really think have consequence. Not because I say it, but because I believe you say it. And work was your idea. Work was and is viewed by you as a good thing. But it's also something that can be a spiritual thing, and a way in which you can accomplish meaningful work as we engage people, as we busy ourselves and are producing things, cleaning things, stocking things, fixing things. As we're doing all of this, this presents us opportunity to reflect you, but also to engage and experience others so that we can point them in your direction. Help us to realize that you want us as your follower to be your disciple, not just on Sundays, not just on Wednesdays, but every single day, including when it is that we're working. So thank you for this time today, and we say this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you.